Late the transport ship Zephyrian Dawn hummed through hyperspace, its cargo hold filled with the latest batch of specimens for the Galactic Empire's research facilities. Commander Vexistar of the 3rd Collection Fleet reviewed his manifest with satisfaction. 12 new species had been cataloged this cycle, including several promising candidates from primitive worlds. His clawed finger traced down the list until it stopped at entry 247B. Juvenile specimen, species designation, human, planet of origin, Terra 3, Sector 7849. The creature had been acquired during a routine sweep of an underdeveloped system. Nothing special about it, really. Just another bipedal mammal from one of those countless backwater worlds that barely qualified for spaceflight. Vextar's second-in-command, Lieutenant Krelos, approached with the daily report. Commander, the new specimens are adapting well to containment. The human juvenile has been particularly docile. Good, Vextar replied, his mandibles clicking with approval. The research division will be pleased. They've been requesting fresh genetic material for their evolutionary studies. What neither alien officer knew was that this particular specimen was 8-year-old Emma Richardson, daughter of Master Chief Petty Officer Jake Richardson, a 20-year veteran of the United States Navy SEALs. Emma had been camping with her father in the remote mountains of Colorado when the alien scout ship had detected their heat signatures. The abduction had been swift and silent, leaving behind only a confused father who would wake up to find his daughter's sleeping bag empty and strange markings in the dirt. Meanwhile, back on Earth, Jake Richardson was experiencing the worst nightmare any parent could imagine. He had contacted every authority he could think of, but who would believe a story about alien abduction? The local police filed a missing person report. The FBI got involved due to the remote location and lack of evidence, but Jake knew something far worse had happened. As a SEAL, Jake had been trained to trust his instincts, and every fiber of his being screamed that this wasn't a normal kidnapping. The circular burn marks in the ground, the electromagnetic interference with their camping equipment the night before, and the complete absence of any human tracks leading away from their campsite all pointed to something beyond terrestrial explanation. Dr. Sarah Chen, a xenobiologist working for a classified government project, was the first person to take Jake's account seriously. She had been studying similar cases for the past 5 years as part of a joint military scientific task force investigating unexplained disappearances. When Jake's report reached her desk, the details matched a pattern she had been tracking across 17 different incidents. Mr. Richardson, Dr. Chen said during their first meeting at Peterson Air Force Base, I need you to understand that what I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels. We have reason to believe that your daughter was taken by non-terrestrial entities. Jake's jaw tightened. After 3 weeks of being treated like a delusional parent by local authorities, finally hearing someone acknowledge the truth was both validating and terrifying. What exactly are we dealing with, Doc? Based on our intelligence, there's an organized effort by what we're calling the Galactic Empire to collect specimens from developing worlds. Earth isn't supposed to be on their radar for another few hundred years, but it appears they've been conducting unauthorized research missions in our sector. The weight of this revelation hit Jake like a physical blow. His daughter wasn't just missing, she was somewhere in space, probably being treated like a lab rat by alien scientists. But Jake Richardson wasn't the type of man to collapse under pressure. He was a warrior, trained in the most elite fighting force on Earth. What are our options? He asked, his voice steady despite the rage building inside him. Dr. Chen pulled up a holographic display showing various spacecraft configurations. We've been developing countermeasures for exactly this scenario. The Aurora project has produced our first faster-than-light capable vessel, though it's still in the prototype phase. How soon can it be ready? That's not the question, Mr. Richardson. The question is whether you're prepared for what this mission would entail. We're talking about infiltrating an alien empire that spans dozens of star systems. The technology gap is enormous. Jake stood up, his eyes burning with determination. Doctor, you're talking to a man who spent his entire adult life learning how to defeat enemies with superior firepower, better technology, and home field advantage. The only difference here is the scale. Dr. Chen studied the Navy SEAL carefully. She had read his file, knew about his deployments in Afghanistan, Iraq, Somalia, and half a dozen other classified operations. Richardson had a reputation for achieving impossible objectives through sheer determination and tactical brilliance. There's something else you need to know, she continued. Our intelligence suggests that humans have certain advantages that the Galactic Empire hasn't encountered before. Our physiology, our psychological makeup, our capacity for what they would consider irrational determination in the face of overwhelming odds. You're saying they don't know what they're dealing with? Exactly. Most species they encounter either submit immediately to superior technology or fight conventional battles they're destined to lose. Humans do something different. We adapt, we improvise, and we never give up. Jake felt a grim smile cross his face. When do we leave? Over the next 6 months, Jake underwent the most intensive training of his life. He learned to operate in zero gravity, studied alien psychology and technology, and worked with a team of scientists and engineers to develop weapons and tactics that could be effective against the Empire's forces. The Aurora prototype was a sleek vessel that incorporated both human engineering and reverse-engineered alien technology, recovered from previous encounters. It was fast, stealthy, and equipped with weapon systems that the Empire had never seen before. When the Galactic Empire realized, "You fools, you kidnapped a Navy SEAL's child," it was already too late. The transport ship Zephyrian Dawn hummed through hyperspace, its cargo hold filled with the latest batch of specimens for the Galactic Empire's research facilities. Commander Vexistar of the 3rd Collection Fleet reviewed his manifest with satisfaction. 12 new species had been catalogued this cycle, including several promising candidates from primitive worlds. His clawed finger traced down the list until it stopped at entry 247B. Juvenile specimen, species designation, human, planet of origin, Terra 3, Sector 7849. The creature had been acquired during a routine sweep of an underdeveloped system. Nothing special about it, really. Just another bipedal mammal from one of those countless backwater worlds that barely qualified for spaceflight. Vextar's second-in-command, Lieutenant Krelos, approached with the daily report. Commander, the new specimens are adapting well to containment. The human juvenile has been particularly docile. Good, Vextar replied, his mandibles clicking with approval. The research division will be pleased. They've been requesting fresh genetic material for their evolutionary studies. What neither alien officer knew was that this particular specimen was 8-year-old Emma Richardson, daughter of Master Chief Petty Officer Jake Richardson, a 20-year veteran of the United States Navy SEALs. Emma had been camping with her father in the remote mountains of Colorado when the alien scout ship had detected their heat signatures. The abduction had been swift and silent, leaving behind only a confused father who would wake up to find his daughter's sleeping bag empty and strange markings in the dirt. Meanwhile, back on Earth, Jake Richardson was experiencing the worst nightmare any parent could imagine. He had contacted every authority he could think of, but who would believe a story about alien abduction? The local police filed a missing person report. The FBI got involved due to the remote location and lack of evidence, but Jake knew something far worse had happened. As a SEAL, Jake had been trained to trust his instincts, and every fiber of his being screamed that this wasn't a normal kidnapping. The circular burn marks in the ground, the electromagnetic interference with their camping equipment the night before, and the complete absence of any human tracks leading away from their campsite all pointed to something beyond terrestrial explanation. Dr. Sarah Chen, a xenobiologist working for a classified government project, was the first person to take Jake's account seriously. She had been studying similar cases for the past 5 years as part of a joint military scientific task force investigating UA's. Jake prepared for departure. Dr. Chen briefed him one final time. Remember, this isn't just about rescuing Emma. If you succeed, you'll be sending a message to the entire Galactic Empire that Earth is not to be trifled with. Jake checked his equipment one last time. His modified combat gear incorporated alien materials, but was designed around human tactics and mobility. He carried weapons that combined human lethality with alien technology, creating tools of war that would be completely unexpected to his enemies. They took the wrong man's daughter, Jake said quietly, as the Aurora's engines powered up, and they're about to learn why you don't mess with a Navy SEAL's family. The ship disappeared into hyperspace, beginning a journey that would change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. The research station Kepler 7 orbited a dying red giant in the Andorian sector. its massive bulk housing over 3 million beings from across the galaxy. Dr. Zalthex, the station's chief xenobiologist, had dedicated the last 40 years of his life to studying the evolutionary patterns of lesser species. In all that time, he had never encountered anything quite like the human specimen. Emma Richardson sat in her containment cell, appearing calm to her alien captors but actually taking mental notes of everything around her. Her father had taught her to always be aware of her surroundings, and even at 8 years old, she understood that information could be the difference between life and death. The cell was approximately 10 feet by 12 feet, with walls made of some kind of transparent aluminum that hummed with energy. There was a sleeping platform, basic sanitation facilities, and a food dispenser that provided a nutritious but tasteless paste 3 times a day. But what interested Emma most were the security. Cameras that tracked her movements and the electromagnetic lock on the door that cycled through different frequencies every few minutes. Dr. Zalthex observed the human child through his monitoring station, dictating notes to his AI assistant. Subject continues to display remarkable adaptability. Unlike other juvenile specimens, it shows no signs of despair or psychological breakdown despite 37 days in containment. What he didn't realize was that Emma had spent countless hours learning survival techniques from her father during their camping trips. Jake had always taught her that the mind was the most important survival tool, and that staying calm and observant was the key to finding opportunities for escape. The research station operated on a strict schedule. Every morning at 800 station time, Dr. Zalthex would conduct his observations. At 1200, nutrition would be dispensed. At 1500, physical examinations would be performed on various specimens. Emma had memorized this routine and noticed something the aliens hadn't: a 17-minute gap between shifts when the monitoring station was unmanned. During one of these gaps, Emma began testing the electromagnetic lock. She had noticed that metal objects in her cell would sometimes spark when they came near the door during the frequency changes. Using a small metal fragment she had carefully worked loose from her sleeping platform, she began mapping the frequency patterns. Meanwhile, the Aurora cut through hyperspace at maximum speed, its hull incorporating stealth technology that made it nearly invisible to standard Imperial sensors. Jake Richardson studied the intelligence reports Dr. Chen had provided, learning everything he could about Kepler-7's layout and security systems. The research station was heavily defended, with a full squadron of Imperial fighters and multiple weapons platforms. But Jake wasn't planning a frontal assault. His years of special operations had taught him that the best way to defeat a superior enemy was to do something they would never expect. "Computer, show me the station's waste disposal systems," Jake commanded. The AI displayed a 3-dimensional schematic showing how organic waste was processed and ejected into space. Most of it was broken down into component atoms and recycled, but solid materials were collected in large containers and periodically jettisoned. "Interesting," Jake muttered. Every security system had weak points, and waste disposal was often overlooked because no one expected an attack to come from that direction. Back on Kepler-7, Emma made her first real breakthrough. During the night cycle, when most of the station's crew was asleep, she managed to short out the electromagnetic lock using the metal fragment and her knowledge of the frequency patterns. The door slid open with barely a whisper. The corridor outside was dimly lit and empty. Emma knew she had maybe 20 minutes before the next security sweep, so she moved quickly but quietly down the hallway. Her father had taught her how to move without making noise, and she put those lessons to good use now. She found what she was looking for 3 levels down: the main computer core. The alien technology was far beyond anything from Earth, but the basic principles were the same. Every computer system needed some kind of input interface, and Emma was small enough to crawl through the maintenance tunnels that larger aliens couldn't access. Using techniques her father had shown her for basic electronics, Emma began carefully disconnecting fiber optic cables. She didn't understand the alien technology well enough to hack it, but she could certainly disrupt it. One by one, she pulled connections that controlled everything from life support to communications to the food dispensers. The effects were immediate. Alarms began blaring throughout the station as systems failed in cascade. Emergency lighting activated and the artificial gravity fluctuated wildly. In the confusion, Emma slipped back to her cell just as security teams began responding to the crisis. Dr. Zalthex arrived at the computer core to find his technical teams frantically trying to restore system functionality. "What happened here?" he demanded. "Unknown, sir," replied the chief technician, a nervous Rigelian whose skin was flushing purple with stress. "The damage appears to be sabotage, but our security logs show no unauthorized access to this area." "That's impossible. Run a full diagnostic on all containment units immediately." The diagnostic revealed that the human specimen's cell had been opened and resealed, but the timestamps made no sense. According to the logs, the door had been opened from the inside, which should have been impossible given the electromagnetic locking mechanism. Emma had bought herself something more valuable than freedom. She had bought time and attention. The aliens were now focused on her, trying to understand how a primitive species had bypassed their advanced security. What they didn't realize was that every minute they spent studying her was another minute closer to her father's arrival. Jake felt the Aurora shudder as it dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Andorian system. The red giant dominated the view screen, its dying light casting everything in an ominous crimson glow. Kepler-7 appeared as a dark speck against the stellar background, but Jake's enhanced sensors revealed the full scope of the research station. "Computer, begin passive scan of target. I want to know everything. Defensive positions, patrol routes, communication frequencies, and structural weak points." The AI worked silently for several minutes before displaying its analysis. Target confirmed as Kepler-7 research facility. Current defensive status shows elevated alert level. Multiple system failures detected in the past 6 hours. Jake smiled grimly. If the station was having technical problems, that could work to his advantage. Chaos was a SEAL's best friend, and it sounded like someone had already started the party. He spent the next several hours studying the sensor data and planning his approach. The waste disposal system remained his best option for infiltration, but he would need to time his entry perfectly to avoid the automated ejection cycles. As Jake prepared his equipment for what would likely be the most important mission of his life, he thought about his daughter. Emma was smart, resourceful, and tough, qualities that would serve her well in captivity. But she was also just 8 years old, and no child should have to face what she was going through. "Hold on, sweetheart," Jake whispered as he checked his weapons one final time. "Daddy's coming." The Aurora drifted silently through the debris field surrounding Kepler-7, its stealth systems masking it among the countless pieces of discarded research equipment and failed experiments. Jake had positioned himself perfectly within the station's waste ejection trajectory, waiting for the next disposal cycle. At exactly 23:47 station time, massive bay doors opened on the station's lower hull, and a stream of compacted waste containers began their journey toward the red giant's gravity well. Jake fired his maneuvering thrusters, matching velocity with one of the larger containers, before using magnetic clamps to attach the Aurora to its hull. The container was roughly the size of a school bus and filled with biological waste from the station's research labs. Not exactly a pleasant way to infiltrate an enemy facility, but Jake had been in worse situations. The key was to detach at the right moment, when the container passed close enough to the station's hull for him to make the jump. Inside Kepler-7, Dr. Zalthex was becoming increasingly frustrated with the human specimen's behavior. Despite increased security measures and constant monitoring, the child continued to cause problems. Food dispensers would malfunction whenever she was nearby. Computer terminals would freeze when she passed them. Even the artificial gravity generators seemed to hiccup in her presence. "It's as if the creature has some kind of electromagnetic field that interferes with our technology," Zalthex complained to his assistant. "But that's impossible according to our biological scans." What he didn't understand was that Emma wasn't generating any kind of field. She was simply applying 8-year-old logic to alien technology, finding simple solutions to complex problems. When you've learned to troubleshoot camping equipment with your Navy SEAL father, figuring out how to short-circuit a food dispenser with static electricity becomes just another puzzle to solve. Emma had also begun communicating with other specimens in the research wing, using a combination of gestures, drawings, and basic mathematical concepts. She had established contact with a Centaurian scientist who had been captured 6 months earlier, and a young Rigelian whose home planet had been surveyed by the Empire. Dr. Veltar, the Centaurian, was particularly intrigued by the human child's escape attempt. In his own language, which Emma was slowly learning to understand, He explained the station's layout and security procedures. The Rigelian, barely an adolescent by his species standards, provided information about guard rotations and shift changes. Together, they began planning something the Imperial Research Division had never encountered before: an organized prisoner uprising. Jake felt the waste container shudder as it passed, within 100 meters of Kepler-7's hull. This was his moment. He activated his suit's thrusters and launched himself toward the station, using his magnetic grappling hooks to catch onto a maintenance airlock. The airlock was designed for automated repair drones, not human infiltrators, but Jake's enhanced suit allowed him to override the safety protocols. Within minutes, he was inside the station's outer hull, moving through maintenance corridors that were too small for most alien species. His first priority was gathering intelligence. Using taps on the station's internal communications network, Jake began mapping the facility's current status. What he found was both encouraging and concerning. The station was definitely in a state of heightened alert, but not because they suspected an infiltration. They were dealing with what appeared to be multiple equipment failures and unexplained technical problems. Jake smiled when he realized what was happening. His daughter was running her own sabotage operation from the inside. The thought filled him with pride and terror in equal measure. Emma was showing the same tactical instincts that had made him successful in special operations. But she was also drawing attention to herself in a way that could be dangerous. Moving through the maintenance shafts, Jake made his way toward the research wing where the specimens were held. Along the way, he planted microcharges on critical systems throughout the station. When the time came for extraction, he wanted to ensure maximum chaos and confusion. The research wing was heavily secured, with multiple checkpoints and sensor arrays. But Jake had studied the schematics during his approach, and he knew exactly where the blind spots were. Imperial security was designed to keep prisoners in, not to stop someone from breaking in from the outside. Emma felt the subtle vibration in the station's hull that indicated a small spacecraft had docked or someone had accessed one of the maintenance airlocks. Most beings wouldn't have noticed it, but her father had taught her to pay attention to tiny details that others missed. Someone was coming, and she had a feeling she knew who it was. She began implementing the final phase of her sabotage plan. Over the past weeks, she had carefully loosened dozens of connections throughout the research wing's computer systems. Now, with a few well-placed impacts using components from her sleeping platform, she triggered a cascade failure that knocked out power to the entire section. Emergency. Lighting bathed the corridors in an eerie red glow as blast doors began sealing, automatically. Dr. Zalthex and his research teams found themselves trapped in various sections of the facility, unable to coordinate their response to the crisis. Jake used the confusion to access the specimen holding area. The electromagnetic locks had failed along with the main power grid, leaving only mechanical backups that were much easier to bypass. He moved quickly from cell to cell, but each one he opened revealed alien beings he didn't recognize. Then he found her. Emma looked up from where she was helping a wounded Rigelian and saw a figure in advanced combat armor standing in her doorway. Even with the helmet's face shield down, she knew instantly who it was. "Daddy?" she whispered. Jake's heart nearly stopped as he saw his daughter. She was thinner than when she'd been taken, and there were stress lines around her eyes that no 8-year-old should have. But she was alive, alert, and apparently leading a prisoner revolt. "Hey there, sweetheart," Jake said softly, removing his helmet so she could see his face. "Ready to go home?" Emma ran to him, and for a moment Jake allowed himself to simply hold his daughter. But they were far from safe, and he could hear security teams trying to restore power throughout the station. "Emma, I need you to listen carefully," Jake said, kneeling down to her level. "We're going to get out of here, but I need your help. How many other prisoners are there? And what's the fastest route to the docking bays?" Emma's response surprised him. Instead of simply answering his questions, she led him to where Dr. Veltar and the young Rigelian were waiting, with nearly 24 other specimens from various species. "We're not leaving without them," Emma said firmly. "They helped me, and the Empire will probably kill them for escaping." Jake looked at the group of alien beings who had somehow been organized by his 8-year-old daughter into an effective resistance cell. It wasn't the simple extraction mission he had planned, but he was a Navy SEAL. Adapting to unexpected circumstances was what he did best. "All right," Jake said, checking his weapons and equipment. We're going to need a bigger boat. Jake's tactical mind quickly assessed the situation. 23 alien prisoners, including his daughter, needed to be evacuated from a research station with a crew of over 3,000. The Aurora could handle maybe 6 passengers in an emergency, but not an entire group this size. Dr. Veltar, Jake said, addressing the Centaurian scientist in the universal trade language he had learned during his mission preparation. What do you know about the station's escape pods and shuttlecraft? The elderly Centaurian's large eyes brightened with understanding. The research bay contains several specimen transport vessels. They are designed for interstellar travel and could accommodate our numbers, but they require access codes that only senior staff possess. Emma tugged on her father's armor. I might be able to help with that. I've been watching the guards input their codes for weeks. Jake felt a surge of pride mixed with concern. His daughter had been conducting surveillance and intelligence-gathering operations while in captivity. She was definitely his child, but the situation highlighted just how much danger she had been in. The group moved through the darkened corridors of the research wing, using the emergency lighting to navigate toward the transport bay. Jake took point, his enhanced armor sensors sweeping for threats, while Emma and Dr. Veltar guided the other prisoners. The young Rigelian, whose name was Krelnoth, proved surprisingly useful as a scout. His species had natural night vision and could detect Imperial security patrols long before they became visible to the others. This early warning system allowed the group to avoid several encounters with search teams who were trying to restore order to the chaotic station. As they approached the transport bay, Jake could hear the whine of Imperial fighters launching from the main hangar. Someone had finally realized that the station was under attack, even if they didn't understand the true nature of the threat. Daddy, Emma whispered, there are usually 6 guards at the transport bay entrance. Jake nodded, checking his weapons. His rifle was loaded with armor-piercing rounds designed specifically for Imperial battlesuits, and his sidearm carried non-lethal options for situations where stealth was preferable to all-out combat. Stay here with the others, Jake instructed Emma. I'll handle the guards. But Emma had other ideas. Wait, let me try something first. Before Jake could stop her, Emma walked confidently toward the transport bay entrance. She had torn her prison uniform slightly and mussed her hair, making herself look distressed and confused. Help, she called out in the broken version of Imperial standards she had learned. Dr. Zalthek sent me to find guards. Big emergency in specimen area. The Imperial guards, massive reptilian beings in powered armor, looked down at the small human child with confusion. In all their years of service, none of them had ever been approached by a specimen, let alone one that was speaking their language and claiming to carry messages from research staff. Specimen should not be outside containment, the lead guard growled, reaching for his weapon. Emma's eyes went wide with apparent fear. Please, Dr. Zalthek said, bring guards quick. Other specimens are dying. Big emergency! The guards exchanged uncertain glances. If specimens were dying due to the technical failures, Dr. Zalthek would indeed want security teams to respond immediately. But allowing a specimen to roam free violated all protocols. While they debated what to do, Jake struck. Moving with the silent efficiency that had made him legendary among special operations forces, Jake emerged from the shadows behind the guards. His knife found the weak points in their armor with surgical precision, while his sidearm delivered neural disruptor charges that dropped the massive aliens without triggering their suit alarms. The entire engagement lasted less than 30 seconds, and when it was over, 6 Imperial guards lay unconscious on the floor. Nice distraction, Jake told Emma as the other prisoners emerged from hiding. I learned it from watching you play poker with Uncle Mike, Emma replied with a grin. Sometimes the best strategy is to make the other guy think you're helpless. The transport bay contained 4 specimen transport vessels, each capable of carrying up to 8 beings in basic life support. The ships were designed for short-range hops between research stations, but they had the range to reach the edge of the system where the Aurora was waiting. Dr. Veltar examined the control systems while Jake worked on bypassing the security locks. These vessels can achieve hyperspace velocity, but their navigation systems are locked to predetermined coordinates. We cannot simply reprogram them for Earth. That's okay, Jake replied. We're not going to Earth, not yet. Jake's plan was more complex than a simple escape. He had studied Imperial fleet positions during his infiltration and he knew that Kepler-7 was just one node in a vast network of research facilities. If they simply fled to Earth, the Empire would eventually follow. But if they could strike at the network itself, Emma, I need you to show me exactly what you did to disrupt the station's systems. Over the next hour, while Dr. Veltar and the other prisoners prepared the transport ships for departure, Emma walked her father through her sabotage operations. Jake was amazed by her intuitive understanding of complex systems and her ability to find simple solutions to seemingly impossible problems. The Empire's technology is incredibly advanced, Jake realized, but it's also incredibly complex. They've over-engineered everything to the point where simple disruptions can cause cascade failures. Like when Uncle Mike's fancy car wouldn't start because a 10-cent fuse blew, Emma said. Exactly like that. Jake began modifying his original plan. Instead of simply escaping, they were going to turn Kepler-7 into a weapon against the Imperial Research Network. Using the information Emma had gathered about the station's computer systems, combined with his own technical knowledge, Jake began programming a virus that would spread through the Empire's research database. The virus was elegantly simple. Instead of trying to destroy Imperial systems directly, it would introduce random errors into their research data. Genetic sequences would be scrambled. Experimental results would be corrupted. Specimen behavioral profiles would be altered. The Empire's scientists would spend years trying to figure out why their research was producing increasingly unreliable results. But the virus had another function. Hidden in its code was a message that would be transmitted to every research facility in the network. Earth is under the protection of humanity. Any further interference will be met with escalating retaliation. You have been warned. As Jake finished uploading the virus to Kepler-7's central computer, alarms began blaring throughout the station. Imperial security forces had finally traced the source of the technical problems to the research wing, and they were mobilizing for a full assault. Time to go, Jake announced, shouldering his rifle. The group split into the 4 transport ships, with Jake and Emma taking the lead vessel, while Dr. Veltar coordinated the others. As they powered up the ship's engines, Jake triggered the microcharges he had planted throughout the station. The explosions weren't large enough to destroy Kepler-7, but they crippled its life support systems and disabled its primary weapons. The station's crew would be too busy dealing with emergency repairs to pursue the escaping prisoners. As the transport ships cleared the station's docking bay, Jake looked back at the massive research facility. It was already venting atmosphere from multiple hull breaches, its lights flickering as power systems failed throughout the structure. Is it over? Emma asked, watching the station shrink behind them. No, sweetheart, Jake replied, setting course for the rendezvous with the Aurora. This is just the beginning. Consequences of Jake's virus began rippling through the Galactic Empire's research network. Dr. Zalthex, who had been transferred to a medical facility after suffering a nervous breakdown following the prison break, watched in horror as reports flooded in from research stations across 12 different sectors. The Rigel Research Collective reported that their entire genetic database had been corrupted, with specimen classifications randomly reassigned to different species. The Vega Science Consortium discovered that 3 months of behavioral studies had been altered, showing that predatory species were now classified as herbivores and vice versa. Most disturbing of all, the Central Research Authority on Proxima Prime found that their computer systems were displaying the same message repeatedly. Earth is under the protection of humanity. Admiral Korthak of the Imperial Third Fleet received the emergency briefing in his command center aboard the massive dreadnought Eternal Dominion. The reptilian commander's scales darkened with rage as he reviewed the scope of the damage. You're telling me that a single primitive human infiltrated our most secure research facility, freed 23 specimens, and introduced a virus that has compromised our entire scientific database? Korthak's voice was deadly quiet, which his subordinates knew was far more dangerous than if he had been shouting. Captain Velros, Korthak's intelligence officer, shifted nervously. Yes, Admiral, but the situation is more complex than initially reported. Our analysis suggests that the human was not acting alone. Explain. The technical sophistication of the virus, combined with the tactical precision of the infiltration, indicates coordination with an advanced intelligence network. We believe Earth may have allies we were not aware of. Admiral Korthak studied the tactical displays showing the locations of compromised research facilities. The pattern of infection suggested a deep understanding of Imperial computer networks and communication protocols that no primitive species should possess. What the Admiral didn't know was that Jake Richardson was currently 3 light-years away, aboard the Aurora with his rescued daughter and their new alien allies. The ship was hidden in the shadow of a gas giant while Jake planned their next move. Dr. Veltar had proven to be an invaluable asset. The Centaurian scientist possessed detailed knowledge of Imperial research protocols and had helped Jake identify the most critical facilities in their network. More importantly, he had revealed something that changed Jake's entire understanding of the situation. The Empire's research program is not just about scientific knowledge, Dr. Veltar explained during one of their planning sessions. They are searching for something specific, a genetic sequence that appears randomly in certain species across the galaxy. Emma, who had been listening quietly while working on a modified tablet that Dr. Veltar had given her, looked up with interest. What kind of genetic sequence? One that grants the ability to interfere with their technology, the Centaurian replied. What they call the chaos factor. It appears to be linked to species that show exceptional adaptability and problem-solving abilities under stress. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. You're saying they're looking for beings who can do what Emma did to their systems? Precisely. The Empire has encountered 17 species with this trait over the past millennium. 15 of those species have been completely absorbed into their research program. The other 2, what happened to them? Dr. Veltar's expression grew grim. They were classified as existential threats and eliminated. The implications hit Jake like a physical blow. Emma's natural ability to disrupt alien technology wasn't just a talent. It was a death sentence if the Empire ever fully understood what they were dealing with. But it also represented an opportunity. If humans as a species carried this chaos factor, they might be the key to bringing down the Empire's technological advantages. Over the following weeks, Jake implemented a guerrilla campaign unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, using the intelligence provided by the rescued prisoners and the virus's continued spread through Imperial networks. He identified and targeted key research facilities throughout the sector. The attacks followed a pattern that baffled Imperial strategists. Rather than attempting to destroy the facilities outright, the mysterious attackers would infiltrate, rescue specimens, and introduce system failures that cascaded through the Empire's interconnected networks. Each raid was precisely timed to maximize chaos while minimizing casualties among the alien crews. Young Krelnoth proved to have an unexpected talent for electronic warfare. The Regellian's natural electromagnetic sensitivity allowed him to detect Imperial communication frequencies and even jam their signals at crucial moments. Combined with Emma's intuitive understanding of technology and Jake's tactical expertise, they formed a team that could strike anywhere in the sector. Dr. Veltar coordinated intelligence gathering, using his knowledge of Imperial science protocols to identify which facilities held the most dangerous research projects. The Centaurian had also made contact with underground resistance movements on several worlds, providing Jake with a network of local allies who could assist with supply and logistics. But Jake knew they couldn't continue this way indefinitely. The Empire's response was escalating with each successful raid. Admiral Korthak had deployed hunter-killer squadrons throughout the sector, and Imperial intelligence was beginning to piece together the pattern of attacks. The breaking point came when they received word that the Empire was planning a retaliatory strike against Earth itself. Imperial scouts had located humanity's homeworld and were preparing to implement what they called a sterilization protocol, the complete elimination of any species deemed an existential threat to Imperial dominance. How long do we have? Jake asked Dr. Veltar as they reviewed the intercepted Imperial communications. Based on their fleet movements, approximately 6 standard weeks before the sterilization fleet reaches Earth's solar system, the Centaurian replied grimly. The force consists of 12 dreadnoughts and over 200 support vessels. More than enough to reduce your planet to lifeless rock. Emma looked up from her workstation where she had been analyzing Imperial computer systems. Daddy, what if we didn't try to fight their ships? What if we made them fight each other instead? Jake paused, considering his daughter's words. Throughout this entire campaign, their greatest successes had come not from direct confrontation, but from turning the Empire's own systems against itself. Emma's suggestion sparked an idea that was both brilliant and terrifying in its scope. The Imperial Command Network, Jake said slowly. If we could introduce the right kind of virus at the fleet level. Dr. Veltar's eyes widened with understanding. You're suggesting we corrupt their targeting systems, make their ships identify each other as hostile targets. It's more than that, Jake replied, his tactical mind racing through the possibilities. We're going to make them believe that humans have infiltrated their entire command structure. Every ship, every base, every communications relay is going to start reporting false contacts and ghost signals. Krelnoth chittered excitedly, the Rigelian equivalent of laughter. The paranoia will spread faster than any virus. They will begin attacking their own forces, convinced that humans are hiding everywhere. The plan was audacious beyond anything they had attempted before. It would require infiltrating the Empire's primary command center on Arcturus Station, the heavily fortified nerve center that coordinated fleet movements across the entire sector. The station was protected by layers of defensive systems and housed over 50,000 Imperial personnel. But Jake had learned something important about the Empire during their campaign. For all their technological superiority, they had never faced an enemy like humanity. Their tactical thinking was rigid. Their security protocols were designed for conventional threats, and they consistently underestimated the ingenuity of so-called primitive species. The assault on Arcturus Station began with a deception that played directly into Imperial assumptions about human capabilities. Jake transmitted a series of false signals suggesting that a massive human fleet was massing in the Proxima Centauri system. The signals were crude by Imperial standards, easily detectable and apparently showing poor security protocols. Admiral Korthak, monitoring the transmissions from his flagship, felt a surge of satisfaction. Finally, the humans were making a mistake. They were revealing their true military capabilities, and those capabilities were laughably inferior to Imperial technology. Deploy the 4th and 7th fleets to Proxima Centauri, Korthak ordered. We will crush this human resistance before proceeding with the sterilization of their homeworld. What the Admiral didn't realize was that he had just removed 60% of the sector's defensive forces from their positions, leaving Arcturus Station with minimal protection. Jake had studied Imperial military doctrine extensively and knew that their commanders were trained to mass overwhelming force against any threat. That doctrine was now working against them. While the Imperial fleets raced toward an empty star system, Jake led his small team toward Arcturus Station. The Aurora, with its advanced stealth capabilities, was able to approach undetected by following the same route used by automated supply convoys. The infiltration of Arcturus Station W. Admiral Korthak stood on the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, watching his fleet tear itself apart through paranoia and confusion. The virus Jake had introduced wasn't just corrupting computer systems. It was systematically destroying the psychological foundation of Imperial military doctrine. Imperial commanders, trained for 1,000 years to trust their technology absolutely, suddenly found themselves unable to distinguish between real threats and false sensor readings. Ships that had served together for decades were now firing on each other, convinced that their former allies had been compromised by human infiltrators. Admiral Captain Velros reported, his voice barely controlled. We've lost contact with 17 ships in the 4th Fleet. The 7th Fleet has engaged in combat with itself. And, sir, the reports coming in from across the sector suggest that humans have somehow infiltrated every major installation simultaneously. Korthak's scales rippled with barely contained rage. That's impossible. Our intelligence reports showed that humans are a primitive species barely capable of interstellar flight. How could they coordinate such a massive infiltration operation? What the Admiral didn't understand was that Jake Richardson had turned the Empire's greatest strength into its greatest weakness. Their vast, interconnected computer network, designed to coordinate military operations across dozens of star systems, had become the perfect vector for psychological warfare on an unprecedented scale. Meanwhile, aboard the Aurora, Jake monitored the chaos spreading through Imperial space with grim satisfaction. The virus was performing even better than he had hoped, but he knew this was only the beginning. The Empire would eventually adapt to this kind of attack, and when they did, they would come after Earth with everything they had. Emma, Jake said, turning to his daughter who was working on yet another improvised electronic device. I need you to help me with something. We're going to send a message to every species in Imperial space. Emma looked up with interest. What kind of message? The kind that starts a revolution. Dr. Veltar had been working with the network of rescued prisoners to establish contact with resistance movements throughout the sector. What they had discovered was that the Empire's control was far more fragile than it appeared. Dozens of species were actively working to undermine Imperial authority, but they lacked coordination and had never had access to the Empire's own communication systems. Jake's plan was to use the virus as a delivery mechanism for something far more dangerous than computer corruption: information. The rescued prisoners had provided detailed intelligence about Imperial weak points, hidden resistance cells, and the locations of secret facilities where political prisoners were held. If this information could be distributed to every species under Imperial control simultaneously, you're going to turn their own network into a resistance broadcasting system, Dr. Veltar said with admiration. Every computer terminal, every communication array, every data display in Imperial space will suddenly start showing information about how to fight back. Exactly. But we need to make sure the message is clear and that it reaches the right people. Over the next several hours, Jake worked with his team to craft a comprehensive information package that would serve as a handbook for Galactic Revolution. The package included detailed schematics of Imperial technology, showing weak points and vulnerabilities that resistance fighters could exploit. It contained lists of political prisoners and their locations, along with rescue plans and extraction routes. Most importantly, it provided a communication protocol that would allow resistance cells across the galaxy to coordinate their activities without Imperial detection. Emma's contribution was perhaps the most crucial element. She had developed a simple but effective method for any species to disrupt Imperial technology using basic materials and principles that could be understood without advanced scientific training. Her instructions could turn any motivated individual into a saboteur capable of bringing down Imperial installations. The virus carrying this information package was released into the Imperial network just as Admiral Korthak was attempting to restore order to his fleet. The Admiral watched in horror as every screen on his bridge began displaying what appeared to be classified Imperial intelligence files. "Security breach," Korthak roared. "Lock down all systems immediately." But it was too late. The information was already spreading through every Imperial facility in the sector. On worlds where the Empire had maintained control through fear and technological superiority, ordinary citizens suddenly had access to detailed instructions for fighting back. Resistance cells that had operated in isolation for decades suddenly found themselves connected to a galaxy-wide network of allies. The psychological impact was devastating. Imperial forces had been trained to believe that resistance was futile because the Empire's technology was too advanced for primitive species to counter. Now those same primitive species were demonstrating intimate knowledge of Imperial weaknesses and exploiting them with devastating effectiveness. Young Krelnoth had been monitoring Imperial communication channels during the information release. "The effect is spreading faster than we anticipated," he reported excitedly. "I'm detecting coordinated resistance activities beginning on 17 different worlds simultaneously." Dr. Veltar was reviewing intelligence reports from his network of contacts. "The Andromedans have seized control of 3 orbital stations. The Rigelian Underground has captured an Imperial research facility and is broadcasting the contents of their prisoner databases. Even species we've never made contact with are beginning to act on the information." Jake felt a mixture of pride and concern. They had succeeded beyond his wildest expectations, but success brought its own dangers. The Empire would not simply collapse, it would fight back with increasing desperation and brutality. That concern proved justified when Admiral Korthak made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Unable to distinguish between compromised and loyal forces, convinced that humans had somehow infiltrated every level of Imperial society, the Admiral authorized the use of Omega-class weapons against his own installations. The Omega weapons were the Empire's ultimate deterrent, capable of sterilizing entire star systems. They had never been used in anger, serving instead as a threat to keep rebellious species in line. But Korthak, driven to desperation by the collapse of his command structure, ordered their deployment against any facility that couldn't provide absolute proof of loyalty. The first Omega strike hit the research station at Alpha Centauri B, vaporizing the facility and everyone aboard. The second targeted a fleet depot in the Vega system, destroying 17 Imperial ships along with the suspected human infiltrators aboard them. The third Omega weapon was fired at Arcturus station itself when Korthak became convinced that the command center had been compromised. Jake watched the destruction from the safety of the Aurora's long-range sensors, feeling sick at the scale of devastation. Thousands of Imperial personnel had died in the attacks, along with countless prisoners and civilian workers. The Admiral's paranoia had turned the Empire's own weapons against itself, but the Omega strikes had an unintended consequence. Species throughout the galaxy, watching the Empire destroy its own forces rather than risk human infiltration, began to realize something profound. Humanity had made the Galactic Empire afraid. For the first time in over 1,000 years, the Empire had shown weakness. They had revealed that their technological superiority could be turned against them, that their vast military machine could be brought to its knees by the ingenuity and determination of a single primitive species. Emma looked up from her workstation, where she had been tracking the spreading revolution. "Daddy, I think we started something we can't control." Jake nodded grimly. "That was always the risk, sweetheart. But sometimes you have to break something before you can fix it." The galaxy was changing, and humanity had become the catalyst for a transformation that would reshape the balance of power among the stars. But Jake knew that the hardest battles were still ahead. The Empire might be wounded, but it was far from defeated, and a wounded predator was always the most dangerous. Galactic Empire was fighting for its survival. What had begun as a simple specimen collection mission on an unremarkable planet called Earth had escalated into the largest galactic rebellion in recorded history. Admiral Korthak, now relieved of command and facing charges of incompetence before the Imperial High Council, watched from his detention cell as reports flooded in from across the galaxy. 47 star systems had declared independence. The Imperial Research Network had completely collapsed. Most shocking of all, several species that had been loyal Imperial subjects for centuries were now actively hunting Imperial forces using tactics and technologies they had learned from the mysterious human information broadcasts. The High Council, meeting in emergency session on the heavily fortified capital world of Imperius Prime, struggled to comprehend how a single human infiltrator had brought their 1,000-year empire to the brink of collapse. "The damage assessment is catastrophic," reported Chancellor Vextel, his ancient voice carrying the weight of impending doom. "We have lost direct control over 60% of our territory. Our military forces are scattered and demoralized, and the rebellion continues to spread through our remaining holdings." High Admiral Zarthek, Supreme Commander of the Imperial Fleet, studied the tactical displays with growing unease. "The human tactics are unlike anything we have encountered before. They do not seek to conquer territory or destroy our forces outright. Instead, they systematically undermine our technological advantages and turn our own systems against us." "What do we know about this human leader?" Chancellor Vextel asked. "Very little," admitted Intelligence Director Melvar. "Our analysis suggests he is a military specialist from Earth, but his capabilities far exceed what our assessment of human civilization would indicate. It is as if he possesses knowledge of Imperial systems that should be impossible for his species to obtain." What the Imperial leadership didn't understand was that Jake Richardson represented something they had never encountered before. A warrior, trained specifically to defeat technologically superior enemies. For 20 years he had honed his skills fighting opponents with better equipment, more resources, and home field advantage. The Empire's technological superiority was just another challenge to overcome. Meanwhile, aboard the Aurora, Jake was planning the operation that would end the war. The rebellion he had sparked was succeeding beyond all expectations, but he knew that the Empire would eventually adapt and counterattack. The only way to ensure humanity's survival was to strike at the very heart of Imperial power. "The throne world of Imperius Prime, Dr. Veltar explained, pointing to a holographic display of the heavily fortified planet. "It is the symbolic and administrative center of the Empire. If we could somehow penetrate its defenses and reach the High Council chambers, we'd need to get past orbital defense platforms that could destroy entire fleets," Jake replied, studying the defensive installations, "plus ground-based shields, automated defense systems, and a garrison of over 10 million troops." "Emma, now 9 years old and far more experienced in galactic warfare than any child should be, looked up from her latest technical project. What if we didn't try to fight through their defenses? What if we made them lower their shields themselves? Jake smiled at his daughter's tactical thinking. What do you have in mind? The Empire is paranoid now. They're seeing human infiltrators everywhere. What if we gave them something real to be paranoid about? Jake's plan was audacious even by his standards. Instead of attempting to infiltrate Imperius Prime directly, they would convince the Imperial High Council that the planet had already been compromised. Using the same psychological warfare techniques that had destroyed Admiral Korthak's fleet, they would turn the Empire's own security protocols against the throne world itself. The operation began with a series of false signals transmitted from various points around the Imperius system. The signals appeared to be human communications using stolen Imperial codes, discussing fictional infiltration operations and supposed sabotage targets throughout the capital. The Imperial Intelligence Service, already devastated by months of rebellion and constantly expecting human infiltrators around every corner, immediately raised the alert level to maximum. Every installation on Imperius Prime was subjected to intensive security sweeps. Communication networks were locked down. The orbital defense platforms were isolated from the planetary grid to prevent contamination by human viruses. But Jake's real target wasn't the defense platforms or the communication networks. He was after something far more precious: the Empire's credibility. Each security measure the Imperials implemented in response to the phantom human threat served to demonstrate their fear and uncertainty to the galaxy at large. Dr. Veltar's network of resistance contacts ensured that news of the Empire's panic spread quickly through the remaining Imperial territories. Species that had remained neutral in the rebellion began to question whether the Empire was truly as powerful as it claimed. If the supposedly invincible Imperials were afraid of a single human, perhaps they weren't invincible after all. The psychological pressure reached its breaking point when Jake transmitted his final message directly to the Imperial High Council chambers. Using communication frequencies that should have been impossible for humans to access, he delivered a simple but devastating ultimatum. Members of the High Council, Jake's voice echoed through the most secure facility in the galaxy. You have 48 hours to announce the dissolution of the Galactic Empire and the recognition of independence for all subjugated species. If you refuse, humanity will demonstrate why you should have left our children alone. The fact that the message had reached the council chambers at all was proof that human infiltrators had penetrated the very heart of Imperial power. At least, that's what the terrified council members believed. In reality, Jake was still aboard the Aurora, 3 star systems away, using a relay network of hidden transmitters that Krelnoth had placed during their previous operations. Chancellor Vextol convened an emergency session to consider the human ultimatum. The debate that followed would later be studied by historians as the moment when the Galactic Empire chose to surrender, rather than face an enemy they didn't understand. We cannot negotiate with terrorists, declared Admiral Zarthek. The Empire does not bow to threats from primitive species. The Empire also does not survive if we continue to fight an enemy that turns our own strengths into weaknesses, replied Intelligence Director Melvar. Our forces are destroying themselves through paranoia. Our technology is being used against us. Our own people are beginning to question our authority. The debate continued for hours, but the outcome was inevitable. The empire that had ruled the galaxy for 1,000 years had been broken not by superior force, but by the simple determination of a father who wanted his daughter back. Emma watched the Imperial surrender broadcast from the Aurora's bridge, sitting beside her father as representatives of dozens of species celebrated their newfound freedom. The Galactic Empire officially dissolved itself, granting independence to all member worlds and establishing a new confederation based on voluntary cooperation rather than forced submission. Is it really over? Emma asked. Jake considered the question carefully. The immediate threat to Earth was gone, and the Empire's surrender had opened up new possibilities for peaceful contact between humanity and the galactic community. But he knew that the universe was a dangerous place, filled with species and powers that humanity had yet to encounter. This chapter is over, Jake replied. But Emma, I think our story is just beginning. Dr. Veltar approached them, carrying a datapad containing offers from dozens of species requesting formal diplomatic relations with Earth. Your world will need ambassadors and advisors as it takes its place in the galactic community, the Centaurian said. I hope humanity will consider sharing its unique perspectives on conflict resolution. Jake laughed at the diplomatic euphemism. You mean our talent for turning enemy technology against itself? Among other things, the galaxy has learned that humans possess a form of tactical creativity that no other species has demonstrated. That gift could be invaluable in maintaining peace. As the Aurora began its journey back to Earth, Jake reflected on everything that had changed since that night in the Colorado mountains when his daughter was taken. Emma had grown from a kidnapped child into a brilliant tactician who had helped topple an empire. The rescued prisoners had become the founding members of a new galactic alliance, and humanity had gone from being unknown primitives to the most feared and respected species in the galaxy. But most importantly, they were going home. Together. Daddy, Emma said as Earth appeared on the view screen, blue and beautiful and free. Next time we go camping, can we maybe stay closer to home? Jake hugged his daughter and smiled. Deal. But something tells me the universe isn't going to leave us alone for very long. He was right. Within a year, the first alien ambassadors would arrive on Earth, followed by trade delegations, scientific exchanges, and eventually calls for assistance from species facing new threats in distant corners of the galaxy. Humanity had proven that even the mightiest empire could fall to determination, ingenuity, and the simple refusal to give up.